Okay, everyone, and welcome again to this podcast entitled Calypso, the New York Experience. My name is Megan Sylvester, and I'm a music sociologist, and I have been doing a series of interviews focusing on Calypso as an art form, and in particular, looking at its emergence, its trajectory in New York City. But today, we're going to be talking in particular with Carol Addison, who is from Trinidad and Tobago, and she is going to tell us not necessarily about Calypso in particular, but she's going to tell us about her journey doing local music. And when we talk about local music coming from Trinidad and Tobago, we usually think Calypso is first and dominant. But we want to speak to Carol Addison-Lewis, who's going to tell us about the types of music that she would have been involved in and her story in terms of her life and performing from Trinidad and Tobago and in New York. So Carol Addison-Lewis, welcome to the program. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Wow. First of all, thank you so much, Megan, for the work that you're doing and, the depth with which you are going to explore, not just explore, but to, advance our culture and to just spread it all over the world, because people need to know how great and how vibrant our culture is. And I'm proud to be a daughter of the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I was born in Trinidad a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in terms of me, my history, my music, um, I started off as a tot on children's programs because I loved music. I came from a musical family. My father played the guitar back in the day in the house, and me being the fifth child of 10 children, there was noise around at all times. And we all, for the most part, loved music. Even my mother was someone who sang along with the radio and things like that. She had a beautiful voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved music from a very early stage, and was encouraged by my older brothers who themselves were doing performances locally, in the community and that type of thing. I was encouraged to go on a radio competition that was hosted by Auntie K, long before you were born. Yeah, but that was my first exposure, as a tot, because it was a program intended to expose little kids, and it was also competitive. So it gave you a chance to, push, prove your best and that type of thing. And then from there, I did many local programs at school and in the community, following my brothers who were already doing some of that. And then I went on to the famous Scouting for Talent. I might miss out a thing or two in between, but just so that we get to the jugular. And I did Scouting for Talent on television that was hosted by the famous, now deceased, but you can't forget him. He started many of our careers, Mr. Holly Bitodier.
Yes.
And so I did that contest about twice. And that propelled me because it was television exposure, so that my music at that point in time was able to reach people outside of my immediate environment. People in other cities around Trinidad and Tobago were able to see me, hear my music, and that opened some doors for some, little concerts here and there, a little paid thing or two. And so that was the start of my career in Trinidad, from an amateur perspective. And let me give you a break to ask a question, because there's just so much to be said.
Right.
Or if you just want me to continue, I will.
And I really, and I'm glad that you spoke about that. So, as I said earlier, when we think about Trinidad and Tobago, we think about, and Trinidad in particular, we think about Calypso, right? So, if you say that you started on Auntie K and you spoke about Scouting for Talent, what were you singing?
I was singing all songs that I heard on the radio.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of us as local kids, we gravitated to the big stars because those are the people we were hearing on the radio a lot.
Right.
And so like Aretha Franklin, Roberta Flack, and some of those names. So I sang, I think the very first time I went on, I sang a nursery rhyme that I
Okay.
had learned in school because I was a tot,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like 6 years of age or something like that. But
Right.
beyond that, there was a desire to sound like what we were hearing
Okay.
on the radio, more or
Yes.
less.
Yes.
So that's what I pursued then and fell in love with it. Fell
Okay.
in love with, R&B and the gospel types of music that was presented back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you were about to tell us what happened after Scouting for Talent. How did
So
you take your
go
career
ahead.
from that position or that point into something else? Is it that you won Scouting for Talent? Is it that you were
Well,
successful and that propelled you?
quite interestingly enough, I won the preliminaries and didn't win the semifinals.
Mm-hmm.
So the winners of the semifinals, there were several semifinals, they converged and competed for the finals. So interestingly enough, I never made it to the finals. But the
Okay.
exposure
Right.
opened doors
Mm-hmm.
because, I guess most of the people who made it to any stage at all beyond the preliminaries is because they were talented. So
Right.
people were identifying my talents back then and inviting me to participate in some of their local events. So that's where it actually started. So even though I
Okay.
didn't win,
Mm-hmm.
I was invited and my career began then. And then, of course, other things began to happen in terms of interest from the recording industry back then, and I did my first 45, and I know people don't even know that language anymore. What's that? And then the
Mm-hmm.
33, which was the LP and
33
stuff,
and
and
a
I did a
third.
33 and a third, to be precise. Yes, I can't leave out the third.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, but that's where it started. And
Mm-hmm.
something rather significant, I'm jumping steps a little bit, but something rather significant happened for me back then. And I think that was almost like putting a stamp on my career, kind of like, well, you're all right, you're a little better than average. Because when I recorded my very first album, my 33 and a third, which was Born to Shine. The
Mm-hmm.
Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Eric Williams, was invited to the launching of that
Okay.
album,
Mm-hmm.
and he attended, much
Okay.
to our surprise.
Okay.
And so the fact that he was there, it just added a little something, a little flair, because
Mm-hmm.
this was kind of very special,
Right.
for my career. And I really appreciated that. And I believe that opened a lot of doors for me
Mm-hmm.
beyond that point.
What genre, if you can, would you say Born to Shine and the songs that you have sung, what genre would you situate that in? It's coming from Trinidad.
I would, I would say R&B,
Okay.
even though I am Trinidadian and I lived in Trinidad and I sang in Trinidad and built a career in Trinidad. There was a huge market in Trinidad for music in addition to soca and calypso. And
Right.
so I happen to be one of those artists who, and even on the Scouting for Talent and on the Anti-Ks and all those other contests, most of us who sang and competed then, we did R&B and B and gospel and
Okay.
those types of songs. It was
Mm-hmm.
widely acceptable, and we heard them on our radio stations, which
Right.
means that this is what was being promoted. This is what we heard in our homes.
Mm-hmm.
So, in
Mm-hmm.
addition to Calypso, which to me back in the day was not even played as often as
Right.
R&B and country and western and those types of songs.
Mm-hmm.
So that which I was exposed to is
Mm-hmm.
what I sang and fell in love with.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I fell in love with my culture as well, but
Right.
that's the genre of music that I gravitated towards and spent a lot of time participating in,
Mm-hmm.
singing and stuff.
Right.
You know, I
And I,
later did a couple socas and stuff. We might get a chance to talk about that. But
mhm.
this is what I focused on because it's what I loved back then.
Right. And I think that's important because whenever people hear about Trinidad, it becomes synonymous with one thing or another thing
Hmm.
or only certain things. And it's
Right.
important for people to know, listen, there was this market for this music. And I'm glad that you made the point that it was played on the radio. So it was
Yeah.
legitimized as
Hmm.
the music of the day. And
It
also,
was. It
right.
surely
So
was.
there's a recent passing of what's her name again? Denise Plummer. And
Uh-huh.
few people know, though they should, few people in today's space know that Denise Plummer started off in that market as well, singing.
Absolutely. And I'm glad
Right,
you brought that up because
right,
Denise Plummer and I performed together on many stages
right,
doing R&B. That's what we did then.
right.
You know, I remember Denise Plummer doing a song one night, man, and she just killed it. I Am Woman. Yeah, we were
Right,
on
right,
stages together, Queen shows, and that's what we sang. And then she
right,
made a
right,
transition into Calypso. But
right,
it's what we all did, you know, the
right,
Mavis Johns and the
right.
Mavis John was someone I looked up to back then, but it's what we all did
Mm-hmm,
then at that time.
mm-hmm.
So
I'm
thanks
glad.
for mentioning that because,
Exactly, and it's
you know,
important because as we craft this concept of who Trinidad is, we must see it in all its facets. It cannot
hmm
only be one thing or the other. So tell us,
yes.
Carol, what happened beyond that? So you've launched Born to Shine. The then Prime Minister Eric Williams is there, and you are a success and a star. What happens thereafter?
Okay, so let's say this before I move on. Here's my disclaimer. I never acted like I was a star, never felt like I was. I was the little girl from Mingo Road into the Puna, you know,
Mhm,
humble
mhm,
and all that
mhm,
stuff.
mhm,
Continue to be that way even up to this day. But
mhm,
I must acknowledge, you know, what actually occurred.
mhm.
After that, a lot of promoters
Right,
began to invite me to do some of the bigger events, and you know, I started to get my feet wet and work harder to become, you know, to hone the skills of a great performer, you know,
mhm,
studied the craft, did a lot of rehearsals. And then, of course, there were the promoters of that day, impresarios who were bringing foreign artists into Trinidad. And here's the interesting thing about what we were just talking about. The reason they were bringing in the big acts from outside is because Trinidadians loved those acts and loved that
right,
type of music and
right.
supported it. And so they were bringing them in. And as fast as they brought them in, because my career was popular through the music
Yeah,
and my music was being played on radio, I would be called to be the opening act for so many of them who came
right,
in.
right.
And by me doing many of those performances, and also performing at a very high standard because I worked very, very hard to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that, you know, the standard of my presentations were really, you know, above par. And so as I continued to grow, you know, skill wise and my performances began to take on a presentation that could have looked even as good as the foreign acts that were coming to Trinidad. I mean, more and more and more doors began to open for me. You know, promoters like Kim Savini, promoters like the Martino brothers, and many others. You know, Claude and Frank Martino. They are the people who created the biggest opportunities for me. They are the people who I'm thanking today
Right.
for really making me who I
Mm-hmm.
became. I couldn't do it by myself. They opened the
Right.
doors. They created the platforms. They created the opportunities for me to share skills and talents, you know, in order for the audiences to see what it is I had to offer. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know, I'm giving them their props. I know Kim is not with us anymore. I think Claude Martino isn't either, but Frank is, and I really want to thank them, you
Mm-hmm.
know, posthumously and, you know, presently, thank them
Right.
for what they've done. I need to be in gratitude for that. I would not be here today had they not done what they did at the time that they did it.
All right. So let's talk about this move to New York.
Uh-huh.
Was that linked to your career? Was that linked to singing? How did that come about?
I would call that divine intervention. Now, let me explain what that is. Um, I think for most of us, there is something that burns on the inside. You have some kind of dream and goal. You don't know how it will be manifested, but you feel something inside of you that you believe will happen. You have a sort of a dream or a premonition of what you think your life is going to look like. And for me, I knew that I would be on big stages. I
Right.
knew that I would travel the world. I knew that I would land in the United States at some point. Don't ask me how. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a goal that was written, but it was in my heart. I knew
Mm-hmm.
that would happen. And the reason I say by divine intervention, I ended up in the United States, to pursue is because I went to, this is an interesting story, but a true story. I went to the Ministry of Education with one of my friends, Gemma. We were very close. And she was attempting to work on a scholarship to travel to the United States to study. I accompanied her. As a matter of fact, I drove her there. And while we were sitting there, the person who was talking to her and helping her with all of the information said, "And what about you, young lady?" I said, "Well, I'm okay." She said, "Well, what do you mean by you're okay? Aren't you planning on going away to study also?" And I said, "Well, what I'm interested in, you probably don't even offer." And she said, "Oh, really?" And I think that kicked, and honestly, the reason I said divine intervention, I was just talking.
Right.
I mean, somebody asked you a question and words were flowing.
Yes.
It was nothing planned. And she said, "Oh, really? What is that?" So I said, "Well, I'm interested in business and, the music industry and that type of thing." And she said, "Well, how so? Why?" I
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well, because I'm involved in music and stuff." Now,
Right.
the woman who
Mm-hmm.
was speaking to me didn't know who she was talking to in the
Right.
moment, even though I was popular.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "But I don't understand. Well, why would you be interested in such?" I said, "Well, because I'm a singer and I want
Mm-hmm.
to know much more about how the business works and how one arrives at, gaining success." And she said, "Well, what type of music do you do?" And after small talk, and she asked me my name, and I said, "Carol Addison." She said, "Oh my God." And she knew who Carol Addison was, but she didn't recognize me in person. And
Right.
she decided that she would search for an appropriate program. There were
Mm-hmm.
two universities that were offering the program that I expressed interest in. One was Syracuse, and the other one was in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave me all of the information.
Right.
And as divine intervention continues, as
Mm-hmm.
faith continues,
Mm-hmm.
I ended up applying. I'll leave out all of the details in the interest of time. But I applied for a scholarship and got through to Syracuse University. It was signed off by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, who at the
Mm-hmm.
time was the Minister of Finance. And I worked as a public servant at the time in the Ministry of
Okay.
Finance. So
Okay.
things were just lining up.
Mm. Yes.
And
Yes.
it was arranged, and I started a program, a 4-year program at Syracuse University. So even though it was not that I left through some kind of tour or
Okay.
something like that, it really was motivated by my desire to learn more. It was motivated
Mm-hmm.
by education, higher learning.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, I started making contacts, with different people in the industry
Right.
and connected to some who had, some nice things going on, particularly a young man named Jeff Krasner,
Okay.
who, a Jewish guy with an R&B career. And
Mm-hmm.
we developed a great relationship. We did a lot of work together and traveled the
Mm-hmm.
world
Mm-hmm.
together.
Mm-hmm.
So even though all in between there, I got married, started a family and all of that, but music was still, my bedrock, was
Mm-hmm.
still my foundation. It was still that which drove my spirit. And so I continued doing a lot of things. I did all kinds of commercials, jingles. I did performances culturally. I did plays. I traveled around the globe doing stage performances with him and,
Okay.
also by myself. So it began to expand.
Right. And as you talk about this expansion in the music industry, you mentioned earlier in the interview about some soca thing that you did. Where did that occur? Was that in Trinidad or was that in New York?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up again because I would have forgotten. I actually backed up in the studio, Ras Shorty I,
Ah,
with
there
some
you
of his
go.
early soca
Mm-hmm.
songs,
Mm-hmm.
because of course I would call him the originator of soca.
Mm-hmm.
And he had some sweet songs, and he was kind of making a transition from, the traditional
Mm-hmm.
presentation of Calypso and mixing it with soul and
Mm-hmm.
call it soca. And I was one of those singers in the background with him,
Okay.
doing some of his work,
Okay.
back in the day with in Ella Angel and,
Right.
a couple other singers. So
Mm-hmm.
I did some of that in studios in some of his early recordings. One might find my name there,
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
I did some of it at KH Studios back then,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and there were some other Calypsonians back in the day too, who were doing recordings at the time, and I was around and I did backups for them as well. And so,
Mm-hmm.
of course, I had more than my feet wet, you know,
Right.
in the
Right.
industry as a legit
Right.
Trini and Soca.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me ask this:
Uh-huh.
these opportunities to do backup within New York or in Trinidad?
I had opportunities to do backups in Trinidad as well as New
Okay.
York.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love, love, love harmonies,
Okay.
blending and creating lines and what have you. Incidentally, my daughter has taken on that particular skill and talent. She's exceptional at that, but that's a separate story. But it's something that I loved a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Mm-hmm.
was very easy for me to do, go into the studio very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you mention, I listened to your interview with Debbie just
Yes.
recently,
Mm-hmm.
and Debbie is so skillful at that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's a skill that I really loved also. She's excellent.
Right.
We know each other really well. She's my buddy.
She indicated that indeed. So
Yeah.
whilst in New York, so you are involved in a career, you're touring, you have a family.
Mhm.
Do you
Yes.
continue to get in, to do the music, or is there any time when you made a decision, you know what, I'm gonna, make a little shift because I know sometimes this happens. So this is also part of what we want to find out about as you move out of Trinidad and Tobago and as life changes, do you move away from music or does it still remain the center?
I honestly believe that if music is your passion, if it's the thing that you love, it never leaves. I have had periods of, separation from music. And believe me, it's been the most miserable periods of my life. When music is absent, I'm very depressed.
Okay.
Figure that one out. But it's because I believe music is it's just part of my fabric. It's part of my DNA. It's a gift from God. God gives us so many different gifts, and I believe that that definitely is mine because I've tried out not being involved, and
Okay.
I recognize what my life felt like. So I know it just need, even if it's just for listening. But I have not never say never. I have not at any point stopped singing,
Right.
even though the genre has adjusted over time and the places that I do most of my performances,
Okay.
have shifted a little. I still am always involved. I'm always singing. I'm still always presenting somewhere, you know, uh, performing somewhere,
Okay.
ministering somewhere
Mm-hmm.
musically.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that I would stop unless it's God's will,
Right.
or something happens physically and I don't have my voice.
Right.
I that that I think would be the only reason that I would stop because there's always an opportunity to sing. There's always a
Right.
desire to.
And
Yeah.
I note that you just mentioned the word ministering. So I am
hmm
aware that you have branched over into gospel music. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Okay, I have always had a love for gospel music because even back in the day, if you recall, or you might not, But there is a song that I'm known by and known for, which is called Take Me Back. And this was done on my very first album that's called Born to Shine. And it had nothing to do with me being in any other genre but the genre that I was in. But because of my love for and my connection with my maker, my God, and my desire for, wanting to live life a certain way and wanting to walk the right path in spite of whatever. I'm not judging anybody, I never do. But my life was always one to try to do the right thing, try to walk the right path. Never perfect, but my mind was always there. My heart always wanted to. And so I gravitated towards gospel music a lot, always. I think on almost every album that I did back then, there was a gospel song somewhere in, and I would perform them on the R&B stages with all the others. And the interesting thing is they were always well received. So it means that the audiences were also hungry for, that kind of output, the meaningful lyrics and the impact that it had on their lives. So, yes, it was something that I loved from the very beginning. But as I grew a little older, and in marriage, I decided to, it's a story, but I'll praise it. I just decided to walk a little closer, to spend a little bit more time, to become a little bit more focused on who I am, who I was born to be, and where it is that God wants me to go in my life. And so it was a personal decision. And I walked into a church on Flatbush Avenue and, just opened myself up for whatever that experience was at Brooklyn Tabernacle and gave myself to Christ. That too is another conversation, but that's where it began for me. And since that time, I am still singing all of my good, clean music because to me, all music is great. It's just a matter of whatever is the content or what message it is you're delivering to the public. It's a choice that you have. So I continue doing my great music. I continued doing songs like Imagine and all the others from my first album up to today, because I believe that they are legit and clean and they have messages. But I've been spending a whole lot more time encouraging people to walk the walk, encouraging people to understand who they are and understand their source, who has given them life, and to understand a little bit more about why we're here, purpose and intention. And, I don't want to preach and, I don't want to go there because this is not about that. But this is my motivation, trying to be the best that I can be and trying to encourage others to see what that is and encourage them to live that life as well, and so that's the path.
Okay. All right. So tell me, in terms of young women starting off in the industry who may already be in the industry and wondering what's next for them, are there any tips, any suggestions, any pointers that you could give to them?
Young women. From interesting. I had some experiences. The reason why I paused and took a deep breath is because I had some experiences when I was coming into the industry. They were unpleasant. I was made to feel uncomfortable from a sexual perspective, and it was daunting. And so there is always an element of people who have the wrong intentions to look at innocence when they know you don't have the experience, you don't know what you're about to try to take advantage. And not just from a business perspective, but also physically. So I would say, don't move alone when you're entering the industry. Don't go into places where you would be exposed to physical or sexual abuse, because that can happen if that's a concern. And also um, find a person or two that you trust from a musical perspective, a keyboardist, another singer, or whomever, and work along with them, as you pursue. And bear in mind, even though it's a lonely journey in terms of the pursuit to get to wherever your dreams are intending to take you, or, where you've been focused from a young girl, uh, be sure to always keep your eyes open, keep your nose clean, you know what I mean, and focus. Do not give up. The struggle is real and it will always present some hardships here and there, but don't let that keep you back.
Right.
Do not at all. Because there's no one that I know who has made it big and made it successful in any area of business, industry or so, who has made it without having some struggle and some difficulty. So don't be afraid of the struggle. Remember to watch out, protect yourself and pursue, pursue, pursue. Do not give up until you achieve your dream.
Yes. Fantastic words. And I think it's really important because whenever I interview women, I think, in this industry, the music industry, it becomes important for them to give a sense of, tell people their story, but also to talk about that because what you just explained is something that's real. In interviewing men, I have found that is not something that they even bring up.
No.
It's not something that they even say, I asked them any challenges and they talk about something else. And so we understand that the music industry is a different place and space for the woman, as opposed to the man. And so it becomes important to think about that. And I'm so glad that you were able to give that kind of advice because, young women will undoubtedly hear this interview and I want them to be assured that whichever genre in which they decide to get involved, that they know that is actually part of what the music industry is. Because I have found in speaking to a lot of young women, a lot of passion for singing, a lot of passion for, different aspects of the industry, whether they want to be stage managers, producers, arrangers, engineers, anything that they want to do in music. And they think it's just going to be based on their skill and passion.
Not at all.
Of course, exactly. And of course, we know that there's so much more. And so it's important for them to have this, panoramic view of the reality.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
It is reality.
Yes. So I don't know if there's anything else that you want to mention that we didn't touch on.
I just want to encourage. Oh, absolutely. Yes, I want to touch on. I have some new music coming out.
Ah, wonderful.
And it's called Life is Good. And it's already mastered. It's already ready for release. It has been played a little snippet played on the radio, and I'm looking forward to this song becoming very, very popular because it speaks to life and living and positivity, and it's encouraging because there is so much going on in the world today that can cause depression, hurts and pains and wars and people are struggling, and the extent of suicide and those types of things. You would know in your field. Yes. It's really rampant. And I want people to be encouraged by just knowing that, okay, there are those challenges out there, but life is still good. You can still pick up the pieces and move on, and that there is a God. This is my position. There is a God who is able to help you and help your loved ones get through this if you're struggling to do it by yourself.
And what is the name of that song?
It's called Life is Good. It's infectious. So far, everyone who's heard it, they loved it. I've played it for disc jockeys, and they just love it, and they're all looking forward. They can't wait for me to say, all right, okay, we're ready. And that will be very soon.
Okay, so thank you very much for sharing that little tidbit so people can look forward to that. And once again, Carol, I want to thank you for agreeing to be interviewed for this podcast. and to share your journey with us, even though you haven't specifically, sung Calypso, but you have been part of the Trinidad and Tobago music industry and fraternity. And that is really what we want to get out to the people. What happens behind the scenes, your Trinidad
Right.
experience and your New York experience. So thank you once
Amen.
again.
You're very welcome, and I thank you so much for the opportunity. Again, you're doing
All
great
right.
work, and
Thank you.
congratulations to you. And my
Okay.
love to all of the listeners and viewers all around the globe.
Okay. So thank you. Take
You're
care.
welcome.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.